Hello everyone. Hope you all are doing well. What if Naruto lets her kiss shatter his world? Friction. It was nearly lunchtime in the hidden village of the Leaf, and the sun was high above the outdoor pre-genin class. Several small stomachs had already voiced their approval of the hour, but their young owners listened to their green-eyed sensei's lecture with unwavering attention. She was an excellent instructor, gentle yet commanding, and a chunin, but she was not officially a teacher yet. That'll hopefully change starting today, she thought. Her class was being inspected, and if she passed, she would become an official teacher at Konoha's Ninja Academy. As she began to delve into the finer points of chakra, she was interrupted by a wave of sound that grew increasingly louder and more heated. Gritting her teeth, she tried to continue, but there was no fighting it now. Incoherent yelling and arguing soon clarified as the source approached the outdoor classroom. Sasuke and Naruto were back. What the hell is that supposed to mean, damn you? You'd think you'd know what Dobi meant by now, dumbass. Oh, there we go. There goes that kiss my feet I'm Sasuke tone of voice. This is the way my voice sounds all the time, dumbass. Oh right, I forgot, that's the way you sound all the goddamn time. Would you just shut up and stop sounding as stupid as you look? Why don't you shut up for once? Funny, as I recall, you're the village's #1 loudest ninja. I can't believe I survived this goddamn mission with you breathing down my neck. I had a great time babysitting you too, Naruto. And I'm looking forward to the next time, and the next time after that. Don't start with me, and the next time after that until you're too old to pass the Junin exam. There was a profound silence as the young man with fox-like slitted eyes beeped a deep breath into his lungs. His companion shook his head and shut his deep black eyes in resignation. And then, WHENAREYUGOINGTOSTOPGIVINGMECRAPABOUTTHRICEDAMNED. Junin examasifa didn't the Venato deal without your shit following? MEAROUNDFOREVERYGODDAMNMISSIONIHAVE. You should pass your test, then. You haven't been Anbu for very long either. You have no right to give. MECRAPOUTITYTYOURGODDAMNSUPERIORITYCOMPLEXMAKESMESICK. Sasuke looked up and watched a familiar figure approach them. I'll pass the test and leave you in the dust and when I become Hokage. Just what Naruto was planning for that day would never be known, as he was then set upon by an irate Sakura who was letting her inner side have dominance for the moment. Sasuke turned away as horrible cries and fearsome snapping noises assured him that Naruto would be very, very quiet for a little while. The black-haired shinobi was not in the clear, however. He quailed inwardly as a demonic-looking Sakura suddenly loomed in his vision. These days, Sakura had ceased to contain her inner self, and the results were not pretty most of the time. It did give him vindictive pleasure to see people that annoyed Sakura mauled and hung out to dry, but sometimes he was on the receiving end of all that repressed anger, and he did not like that at all. Sasuke-kun. His heart lifted. If she said his name quietly, it usually meant he was safe. I realize that Naruto can be very trying, Sakura went on, but could you sink to his level somewhere else? Sasuke raised an eyebrow, which was a mistake. Inner Sakura nearly bowled him over. I'm trying to hold a class here, and I'm being inspected. Take that, the hand that pointed at the nearly dead Naruto shook with rage. Him, away. Until the class is over. Move. Trying to look like he wasn't hurrying, Sasuke scooped up the prone golden-haired shinobi and promptly disappeared. Sakura huffed and stomped over to her class. Noting that some of the students were shaking, she counted to 10, submerged her inner self, and put a bright smile on her face. Sorry about that, kids. Now, chakra flows from the center of the body. As the children relaxed back into listening, she chanced a glance at her inspector. He smiled and gave her a thumbs up, a long scar visible over the clipboard he held before his face. Thank goodness it's Iruka-sensei, she thought ruefully as the noon bell tolled and the children got up with exclamations of joy. At least he understands what I put up with. But she couldn't help worrying. Naruto settled himself against the wall of the Junin office hallway to wait and tentatively brought a hand to his face, wincing as he passed his fingers over his cheek. A bruise was forming, and it wasn't going to be a small one. He smiled, then cursed as a dull throb of pain shot through his face. Sakura was formidable when she was mad. Actually, she was pretty formidable when not, as well. The thought filled him with pride. The cute little girl that had become his teammate 7 years ago had grown so much, had become so strong in body and mind. And he, Uzumaki Naruto, had been a part of that. Though he hadn't an inkling of how much good or bad he'd done, he had been with her while she grew and changed. Only 2 other people could claim to have seen as much as he had. Over the years, his childish crush on her had dissipated into platonic affection. She was as close to him as a sister, and he wasn't reluctant to admit that he felt as much love and pride for her as if he really was her brother. So he was extremely contrite when she emerged from the office. Feelings aside, he feared the fist of righteous Haruno rage. Sakura-chan, I'm really sorry about disrupting your class, I wasn't watching. Sakura-chan? Naruto's vibrantly blue eyes snapped open with worry as Sakura came to a halt before him, head bowed. What is it? His ears were nearly blasted off as she suddenly whooped and grabbed him in a fierce hug. I did it, Naruto. I'm a sensei. Look, all the paperwork's stamped and done, I did it. Of course you did. Naruto managed to choke, like there was any chance of you not getting it. Well, there was an extremely good chance, seeing as you made me lose my temper in front of the kids. Sakura's enthusiastic hug intensified exponentially. And I thought I could lose it. But Iruka-sensei was my inspector. He waved it off. Ah Naruto, I did it. Wait till I tell Lee-san. Naruto fervently wished that she would not. The village would burn in the flames of Rock Lee's intense joy. Where's Sasuke-kun? Sakura went on, looking around for the quiet Uchiha. I thought he'd come to see the results. Like that bastard would do anything so thoughtful. Naruto's banter took on a bitter edge. Sakura sighed and released him so that she could look into his glowing sky-blue eyes. Did you two fight again? She asked quietly. When do we not fight? Naruto's eyes immediately narrowed into trickster slits as he smiled. Something'd be horribly wrong if we didn't. Hiding again, Sakura thought with an inner sigh. He always flashed that certain smile when he was upset. But she smiled gently at him so as not to worry him. The childish disdain that she had once felt for him had melted away long ago, had given way to grudging and then unconditional affection. She loved the golden-haired ninja fiercely, like the elder sister he never had, and acted accordingly. Over the years they had spent together, she had watched him grow from a brat into a reliable young man, and the time had only strengthened her fondness for him and increased her desire to give him the love that only family could give. So she tried not to hurt him or worry him, unless like today, for example. His stupidity could not be ignored. But Sasuke-kun was not so careful. So, mission was bad, huh? Sakura asked carefully. Naruto put his hands behind his head in his classic nonchalant pose. No, it was fine, had to escort a train of merchants into the fire country, but Sasuke and I mean, he was breathing down my neck the entire way and putting on his goddamn airs. Ya no, pay attention, Dobi, and, stop making so much noise, Dobi, and, you beep, Dobi. Ya no, I think he's forgotten my real name. Anyhow, it pissed me off, and when we got back into Konoha, he started up again, and I, kinda lost it. So, he opened one eye and peered hopefully at her. So that's why I was making so much noise, so I'm sorry, 'bout disruptin' your class and all. She was about to forgive him graciously, but then he smiled a gigantic grin and said, but it didn't make a difference that you went nuts anyway, I mean, you passed? Guess they don't care about your psycho-demonic super ugly side long as you teach well. There were several ugly cracking noises and a dull thud, then silence. Iruka poked his head out of the Junin office, clearly annoyed at the scuffling that had disturbed him. His eyebrow twitched as he beheld an unconscious Naruto crumpled before the office door and an irate pink-haired ninja stalking down the hallway. MMMP, PFFFF, Okawari, Naruto muttered, lost in a pleasant dream that involved a lot of free ramen. Iruka rolled his eyes and snapped his index finger against the tip of Naruto's nose. After screaming in pain, raging over the childish prank, and some blinking, Naruto felt ready to join the coherent world again. Where the hell am I? He asked sourly. The Junin office. Iruka settled down with a sigh to his desk again, where a formidable pile of contracts awaited his inspection. Naruto's eyes widened at the sight. Geez, you're gonna get fat staying in here reading those things. You could do it for me, Uruka said pleasantly, stamping one for rejection and throwing it into the outcast pile before drawing a small scroll towards him and opening it. He noted that Naruto's eyes clamped shut, hiding his eager nervousness. Uruka wished he had better news for him. So, he began brightly. I heard you did well. Naruto looked affronted. Of course I did. I do everything well, he leaned forward. So? Behavior in check most of the time, treated the clients with courtesy and caution, even carried some of their wares for them, good marks from your clients, and, Uruka scanned the rather frazzled scroll. Full marks from one of the Anbu accompanying you. He stressed the word, 1. In the wake of the astonishing silence following, Uruka lifted his eyes from Naruto's scorecard and focused them back onto the young man's face. You know, if you didn't scowl so much, you'd have a lot more luck with women, he said gently. It was indeed a black, ugly scowl that twisted Naruto's face. Stupid asshole, he muttered. Uruka heaved a silent sigh and tossed the scorecard back onto the desk. I can't imagine why you'd antagonize Uchiha when your test depends so much on passing the field trial. Naruto was suddenly at the desk, reading the scroll. The look on his face grew even uglier as he scanned the parchment. He failed me. The answer was obvious, so Uruka did not say it aloud. He rubbed the bridge of his nose in thought, then leaned forward to pick up another contract. Well, it's obvious that your performance and behavior were fine, except towards Uchiha, I suppose. Did you two fight again? Hot anger swelled in Naruto's throat, choking him. The hand holding the scroll shook with suppressed rage. He failed me again. Yes, Uruka tried to sound as gentle as he could. And I'm sorry Naruto, but unless I get a pass from both Anbu present on your field trial, I can't pass you for the Junin exam. You know that. So, I really think that you should try to swallow your differences if only for the sake of the Exa. He was not surprised but he jumped anyway as the younger man slammed a fist down onto the desk. Contracts rained to the floor as the Naruto slowly raised his freshly bruised hand. That, goddamn, asshole, he gritted out. Something hot and thick was bubbling deep inside his chest, a pool of molten feeling. I'm sorry, Naruto, Uruka said again, quietly. You've got to go through the system just like everyone else. Then get Sasu. Get that asshole out of the system, Naruto shouted. He's the one screwing me over. He's the reason I've had to take 2 field trials, and now I have to take another one. I'm not the one in control of that, Naruto. Uruka reminded him, and I can't amend the Junin exam committee's decisions. I don't think anyone can. The air was hot with Naruto's rage, but it had to be said. And there's got to be a reason that Uchiha is marking you down. Uruka shut his eyes and firmly continued. I know it's not anything to do with your abilities, but if you can't get along with your teammate, then you really can't pass the field trial. The most important thing, especially for Junin, is to be able to work together to accomplish nearly impossible tasks. If it takes failure for you to realize that, then that's the way it has to be. You have to get along with him, Naruto. If you want to pass the Junin exam, you've got to be able to swallow your pride for once. Uruka had said the last few lines of his tirade to himself. He knew that even before he opened his eyes. The last of the contracts fluttered off the desk as a playful breeze danced through the now open window. The brown-haired Junin rose slowly and took his time gathering up the parchments littering the floor. When they were arranged in a neat stack on the desk, he walked heavily to the window, meaning to close it. Instead, he braced his hands on the sill and leaned upon them, staring out at nothing and letting his thoughts overtake him. Kakashi, you've got to be wrong. Meditating, the hidden village of the leaf glowed in the late afternoons. As the sun would sink below the great wall of Hokage, it would light the rock from behind, giving it a deep gold luster that would bathe the village in warm, tinted light. It was thus impossible to make out small figures atop the rock wall, unless one wanted to go temporarily blind from the sun's fiery splendor. The last of the Uchiha clan knew that. That was why he was there, so he could be alone. Sasuke saw the top of the rock wall as a place of refuge. He practiced there, rested there, and in rare instances, took naps there. No one bothered him because no one wanted to make the climb up the rock face to get to the top. The black-haired Junin stretched luxuriously in the generous warmth. He loved the sunshine. He would never admit it, and one certainly couldn't tell with his white skin, but he loved to soak up as much golden warmth as he could get. It wasn't quite enough, but it felt almost powerful enough to permeate the frigid nature of his soul. A brief pang of something hot pulsed through his chest as he unwillingly remembered what he had done. I am such a bastard. But he refused to dwell further on that, and turned his attention to a presence that had been steadily making its way towards him. There was probably only one person in the village ornery enough to intrude upon another's sacred place, even if that place was almost physically inaccessible. But then again, there were no inaccessible places for masters of chakra. Hitaki Kakashi's half-covered face suddenly rose level with Sasuke's feet as he finished walking straight up the rock face. "Yo," he said by way of greeting. "Yo yourself." Sasuke eyed him briefly, then turned his gaze away. Kakashi was undaunted. He merely flipped himself over so that he could sit next to the younger Junin, pulling an adult novel out of his leg pouch in the same movement. A golden silence stretched between them as one man read and one man contemplated Konoha at sunset. "So, mission was successful, I heard." Kakashi did not move, did not lift his eyes from his book. "Yeah." Sasuke's voice was as emotionless as ever. "I heard you failed Naruto again." "Yeah, reason?" "Same as always. He's too obnoxious and loudmouthed to be a halfway decent shinobi. He's got the abilities, but he wouldn't be able to handle a real Junin mission. Plus, he aggravates me." "Well, I heard he didn't aggravate the other Junin, or the merchants, so I'm assuming that it's personal. And you really shouldn't use personal feelings to judge this kind of stuff. Take me off the field trial group, then." Sasuke shrugged. "It's not like I wanted to do it in the first place." "No," Kakashi said thoughtfully, folding a page in his book and closing it. "No, you didn't." Silence stretched between them. Sasuke sighed quietly. Kakashi was something like a combination of elder brother and father to him, and yet he felt that he didn't understand a quarter of the things that the gray-haired Junin did. "Why do you put me on Naruto's field trial if you know I don't want to judge it?" Sasuke asked softly. Kakashi did not answer. The sun had nearly sunk completely behind them. The village's radiant appearance was dulling rapidly. After a few more moments of silence, Sasuke rose and brushed off the back of his jacket, a silent dismissal. While he was doing this, Kakashi chose to speak. "The obvious answer is one that you already know." Sasuke snorted ungracefully. "Teamwork," he thought dryly. The words still held magic for the copy ninja. "You want my approval for Naruto to become a Junin?" "Yes." Kakashi smiled at Sasuke underneath the face mask. "That's the obvious answer." "Right." The Uchiha looked away, scoffing, but did not take off. He was waiting. Kakashi's uncovered eye opened and contemplated the young man standing next to him. "I put you on the trial team because I want you to stop fooling yourself." Sasuke stiffened and whipped his head around to stare at Kakashi's face. The right eye watched him serenely, but seriously. After realizing what he was doing, Sasuke wrenched his gaze away. Kakashi's right eye closed as he smiled, and he rose, putting his book away and looking down at the village below. "I want you guys to be happy," he said gently, and before the words exploded in his head, before Sasuke could open his mouth to say something, anything, Kakashi said, "There's some leftover Oden on the stove. I'm gonna be late, so go ahead and eat," and stepped straight off the cliff edge, plummeting down into the village. The night was not so kind to Konoha. Soft black shadow dulled every building, darkened every street. The little baubles of light that were street lamps, house lights and the glows of late-night bars only made yellow dents in the sea of velvet black. Only the moon's luminescence could chase the shadow of night, melt its potency down and give scant visibility to the mortals below. There had been a full moon only 3 nights ago, so gentle white light rained down upon the village in still copious amounts, filtering down through the tree cover of the forest behind Konoha, lighting in the sunshine-colored hair of a solitary ninja sitting among the trees. Naruto lifted his face towards the moon and took in the quiet beauty without thought or sound. Only the soft whisperings of the trees around him dared to make comment about his silent conference with the great white orb of light. He knew that the great Nine Tails, the monster that resided inside him, loved the moonlight, so much so that the emotional barrier between man and beast would weaken and sometimes Naruto would be tempted to howl his adoration of the moon to the skies. But Naruto liked the moonlight as well. Ever since he was a small child, he had taken solace in the great celestial body that ruled the night sky. When he was younger, it was the only thing that had watched over him at night, laid its cold and gentle light over him like a blanket while he sat on a swing in the playground and cried for love lost. But now he could face the moon without crying. He knew what it meant to be loved now. He still liked to talk to the moon, though. It was like an old friend, someone that would listen to him, just listen, and never laugh at him, never give him unwanted advice, never criticize him in the harshest possible manner just when he thought he'd done something right. Naruto suddenly wanted to scream. He did not want his train of thought to run in that direction, any direction that reminded him of a certain asshole who only lived to screw him over and mock him to boot. But how could he avoid that if he was looking at the moon? A memory only 3 nights old began to play out in his mind, the last night of the full moon. Sasuke carefully folded his bedroll and looked around at the 7 people camped in the shadowed crevice of several large boulders. 6 merchants and 1 junin, all accounted for and sleeping well. One of the merchants smacked his lips and rolled over, drooling contentedly. The black-haired shinobi turned away and vaulted up to the top of the rock formation, where Naruto was keeping watch. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Instead of constantly scanning the area below, or meditating to sense foreign chakra, Naruto was staring into the sky. "Are you sleeping with your eyes open?" Sasuke asked quietly, but sternly. Without answering or shifting his gaze, Naruto lifted a hand and made a very rude finger gesture. Sasuke snorted and flopped down next to the other ninja, who was wrapped in a blanket to ward off the chill of the night. "Your shift's over," he said curtly. "Go get some sleep." "I'm not sleepy." Naruto swiveled his head to look at Sasuke, blue eyes glowing as if some of the moon's radiance had been absorbed into them. "I can stay here all night." "That's not going to impress anyone," Sasuke said dismissively. "You don't get more points for doing extra guard duty." Such a comment would normally receive a classic Naruto scream of denial, but not this time. "I'm just not sleepy." Naruto turned away again. "You can do guard duty if you want, I'm just gonna stay up here." "Suit yourself." They stayed that way for a long time, Naruto staring at the moon, Sasuke scanning the territory around them. "What's so interesting about the moon, anyway?" Sasuke asked suddenly. Naruto stirred slightly, then turned to look at him, a big smile on his face. "I like it. I've always liked it." He turned back to regard the great white sphere. "It's always there for me." Sasuke lifted his own eyes up to the heavens for a moment, then let his gaze drop. Trust Naruto to attach sentimentality to something as distant as the moon itself. "It's cold," he said softly. "Huh?" Naruto turned to him again, lifting an eyebrow, then began to pull the blanket away from his shoulders. "Here, you can have tea." "Not that, idiot." Sasuke closed his eyes, as if annoyed. "I mean the moon, it's cold." Naruto knew that his former teammate was not very good with words, but this was still too sparse for him to understand. "Huh?" he said again. Sasuke was quiet for a moment. Then he began to speak softly, but rapidly. Naruto did not interrupt, as moments like these were rare for the Uchiha. "The moon's light," Sasuke faltered, then seeing that Naruto was actually going to listen, went on. "It's a generous light, and it's beautiful, but it doesn't have any warmth to it. Not like the sunlight. Sunlight warms you, not only physically, but deep in your soul. It makes you feel stronger and happier, it somehow fills the emptiness inside you. Moonlight is gentle, but so cold. It makes a person feel naked somehow," he amended at the end. He waited for the pealing laughter that would follow, that would grate on his ears and further freeze the feelings that lurked deep inside him, those feelings that no one bothered to understand. But the laughter did not come. "Do know?" Naruto was looking at the moon again. "Do know, I know what you mean, but that's not how I feel at all. I've always felt that the moon watched over me, like when I was a kid, a really silent but, he struggled for the word. Someone who's always there, what's that word again? Omnipresent. Yeah, that one, an omnipresent protector," Naruto said triumphantly. "And then sun. The sun is always obnoxious about itself and how powerful it thinks it is, with its heat and light. You can't talk to the sun like you would the moon, it wouldn't understand." "Talk to the sun?" A ghost of a smile was playing about Sasuke's lips. "Yeah." Naruto's eyes crinkled up into slits, not to hide anything, but instead to make way for his enormous smile. "I talk to the moon all the time. Seriously, it listens, and it doesn't say jack to you. It's great." Sasuke laughed. It was rare to hear the Uchiha laugh, and Naruto beamed along with pleasure. And after the laughter died, there was only a contented silence and the moonlight's gentle glow. Naruto was beginning to feel very sleepy, and he gave a great jaw-cracking yawn. Sasuke didn't seem to notice. The golden-haired shinobi began to snuggle down into his blanket and let the comforting falling sensation of sleep overtake him. "You remind me of the sun." Naruto's eyes opened slowly and focused on the young man beside him, who was not looking at him. It was as if he'd spoken to himself. Naruto smiled a sleepy smile. "You remind me of the moon," he said. And the last thing he remembered before falling asleep was that Sasuke had turned to him, and he had beheld something like fear in the deep black eyes. "And then after that, he just started being an absolute asshole about everything that I did." Naruto glared at the silver-tipped grass below him. "I mean, yeah, I made a few mistakes, but they were little ones. He didn't have to go and fail me again. It's not like I dropped a kid in the river like I did last time." He huffed and crossed his arms. The moon made no comment. "I don't know what his problem is." Naruto tried to wither the grass with the ferocity of his scowl, but for some reason, the scowl was melting away, to be replaced by a rather sad bewilderment. "I don't understand him at all," he admitted quietly. "Understand who?" Naruto fell off the tree stump he'd been sitting on and jumped back up with a yelp. Iruka-sensei." He yelled accusingly. He beheld the Junin's torso and head hanging out of a nearby tree. "You scared the shit out of me." Iruka laughed and dropped neatly to the ground. "Thinking hard?" he asked pleasantly. "You're at a level where you should be able to sense me coming, you know." "Well, then again, you were never really good at multitasking." Naruto muttered sullenly, knowing Iruka was right. The older man smiled. Though Naruto was now 19 years old, he had not lost most of the traits of his youth, one being sulking. "Speaking of tasks, I bet you haven't made anything at home, huh?" Naruto jumped guiltily. Iruka laughed and came forward to pat him on the shoulder. "It's okay. You had a lot on your mind today." He turned his head towards the village. "I just got out, and we're both tired. Let's eat out. I bet the cafeteria's still open." The words he was about to utter lodged in his throat. Naruto had leaned forward to rest his head on Iruka's shoulder. They stood silently for a few moments, Iruka's hand frozen on Naruto's shoulder and Naruto just resting, trying to empty out the tangled web of feelings and events from his head. "Can we please have ramen?" Naruto asked quietly. Iruka swallowed and resisted the urge to hug the young man. "Sure." Speculating Sakura waved as the last of her students ran off to their next class. Smiling, she absent-mindedly flicked her hair off her shoulders and turned back to the classroom. There wasn't much to tidy, but the kids always managed to cause some disarray. She fell to erasing the blackboard, noting the time. It was 2:50, she'd have to wait 10 minutes before Lee finished coaching the kids' taijutsu classes, and since he would always show up wherever she was at 3 o'clock on the dot, she preferred to wait for him in her classroom. It wasn't that she was ashamed of him, but Lee had a habit of belting out songs of love and adoration whenever he saw her, and he had caught her at the grocery store just last week. The cashiers had not stopped tittering at her since. She'd have to teach him not to do that. Beat it into him, more like. But she couldn't help smiling. Lee had come so far since the fateful Chunin exam 7 years ago, where he had sustained injuries that had nearly ended his life as a shinobi. The 5th Hokage's surgical procedures had worked, but she had warned Lee that it would take years. At least 4. For his physical prowess to return to him. But he'd proven her wrong. He had regained his form in 1 year. The next hurdle was his utter lack of jutsu capability. He failed the Chunin exam 3 years in a row because of it. But with Sakura's help, he had cracked and sought tutoring. He finally passed. Now, 3 years later, he was a taijutsu sensei at the Ninja Academy with 23. A rank missions to his name. And somewhere during all that time spent with him, Sakura had found it increasingly easier to disregard those eyebrows, easier to comfort and encourage him when he was down, easier to let him be his bumbling, passionate self. Somewhere in all that time, something tangled and complex had begun to grow in her and had ensnared Rock Lee in its tendrils and branches. All she could do, all she wanted to do, was to grow with him. She had nearly finished erasing the blackboard when the door slid open and footsteps heralded a new arrival. "You're here early," Sakura said in some surprise, not turning around. "Hang on, I'm almost done," she finished, closed her eyes and turned, bracing herself for the torrent of hearts and the enthusiastic hug she would receive. It did not come. She held out her arms, and still nothing. Frowning, she opened her eyes and promptly squeaked in embarrassment. Sasuke was regarding her coolly, though he had one eyebrow raised. Sasuke-kun. Sakura's face burned. Sorry, I thought you were Lee-san. I figured. Sasuke sat on one of the desks. You think he'd blow a gasket if I was here? Of course not. Some of Sakura's composure had returned, and she began to rearrange the desks into straighter lines. He's not a jealous person. He's too simple-minded for that, Sasuke thought. By the way, congratulations on your teaching certificate. He tossed a small bundle of irises onto the counter beside the classroom vase. Thank you, Sakura said warmly, but Sasuke had moved into a silent contemplation of the classroom floor. Sakura arranged the flowers nicely, then turned and looked directly at her former teammate, who did not notice but kept on musing in a totally different world. It was hard to say what Sakura was to Sasuke. Her love for him had not abated, but as the years went by, the nature of her love had changed. She had realized, though some of the explanation had come directly from him, that what he did not need was another irritating, mindless girl who fancied herself in love with him. She had been heartbroken when she'd finally admitted it to herself, but she had healed, and she had indeed become Sasuke's special girl, but not in the way she'd imagined it. She was like a combination of elder sister and mother to him. He confided in her what he could not to Kakashi-sensei. Sakura figured that she filled the empty space that his real mother had once occupied. She was fiercely proud of her role. There was no other woman in his life that he respected and cherished more, and to be able to take care of him the way she could was more than any Konoha girl could boast of. She loved him as much as she loved Naruto, and just as platonically. But this did not mean that he could get away with his behavior. Sasuke-kun, she began quietly, trying not to let her inner self take control. Why did you fail Naruto again? The Uchiha did not answer, nor did he look at her, but he could feel the intensity of her stare boring into his skin, possibly passing through muscle and bone in an intense search for answers lost deep in his soul. He did well. He received top marks from everyone, and that's hard to do. Everyone. She took a step closer to him. Everyone except you. No response. You know how much it means to him. Sasuke knew. Naruto's dream of becoming Hokage would become even more tangible when he ascended to Chunin level. And it's not passing the exam that matters. He wants your approval. His insides crashed together painfully, and his eyes suddenly met hers. She stopped, a tirade clearly on the tip of her tongue, and yet she knew that he wanted to, that he needed to tell her something. The room was still. Outside, Lee's enthusiastic roars spurred the children on to greater efforts, but the sound was lost upon the two shinobi. I can't give him that. Sasuke said slowly, deliberately, desperately, I can't. Why not? Sakura's voice was still tinged with anger. It wouldn't hurt. He's worked so hard, and he values your opinion a lot, no matter how much he denies. No, Sakura, I can't. You have to understand. Why not? Sakura snapped. Because everything would come apart, Sasuke said lamely. Because I saw something in him, because I'm afraid of it. Because I'm afraid of myself. Sakura grabbed her hair in frustration and growled. Sasuke-kun, to be frank, this thing you guys have going on between you is as stupid as it is so over 7 years ago. Can't you give it a rest? Don't you get tired of hating each other? I don't hate him. The answer was so sudden and so full of suppressed emotion that Sakura stared. Sasuke looked startled himself, as if he hadn't meant to say it but it had burst out of him without consent. And he was apparently not finished. I'm trying to keep him away, I think. I don't even know, he said slowly, unwillingly, finally locking eyes with Sakura and allowing her to see his state of mind through his gaze. She saw confusion and fear, and then her breath caught in her throat as she beheld something that was obvious and yet not, destined and yet not. Something so right, Kami-sama, is it even possible? She thought dazedly. Sasuke-kun, she began helplessly, but was interrupted by Lee's booming, happy voice. Sakura-san, I have pined for you all day. Ah. The indefatigable Rock Lee noticed rival number 2 and instantly nodded his head with respect. Sasuke-kun, it has been a while. Sasuke nodded back. all traces of the last few moments completely gone from his face. Sakura sighed inwardly, then smiled ruefully as Lee found out that the flowers were for his Sakura-san and nearly killed Sasuke with the exuberance of his gratitude. Sasuke-kun, are you? It was obvious that something had happened between Naruto and Sasuke. They did not speak to each other unless they had to, and when they did, mothers covered their children's ears. But because Naruto still smiled and Sasuke was still moody, their antagonism was passed off as a completely normal event. After all, didn't those two fight all day time? It wasn't breaking news. And after a few more days, Naruto and Sasuke were interacting civilly once more, and the inhabitants of Konoha rolled their eyes and got about their business. Naruto was as obnoxious as ever, Sasuke brooded, and all was right in the hidden village of the Leaf. Except that Naruto was extremely defensive and touchy now, especially around Sasuke, and the Uchiha went out of his way to avoid the blonde shinobi when he could. But oh well, this change in their relationship hardly mattered to the majority of Konoha. Sakura cared, though, and being the brilliant, intuitive and concerned kunoichi she was, she took her theories and thoughts to a friend that she liked and respected immensely, someone she could trust. But oh man, did Ino have a loud voice? Are you kidding me? Ino's voice nearly shattered the windowpanes of her family's flower shop. Sakura waved frantically for her to be quiet. It's just a hunch, she hissed. So don't go screaming it out. Ino sat back in her chair, completely flabbergasted. I can't believe, or actually I can. No, never mind. I can't. Sakura sat back as well, picking up her teacup and turning it around in her hands. She almost dropped it as Ino's face appeared right under her nose. Are you sure? The blonde asked. No, Sakura shut her eyes in annoyance. It's just what Sasuke-kun said, got me to thinking. And it somehow works out. But it's a shame, Ino mourned, reaching out to pour more tea. I'm a lot more beautiful than Naruto. Sakura gave her a look that would have frozen the tea, but Ino giggled. Girl, you're so easy to tease. She filled both cups but did not drink out of hers, choosing to stare at it instead. No, it makes sense, she mused. In fact it seems, right. Sakura looked at her friend sharply. Ino had chosen the same word that she had, the word, right. So what exactly was bothering Sasuke-kun? Ino stopped staring at her tea and looked up at Sakura. So why are you telling me? She asked. You want me to go play matchmaker? No. It was Sakura's turn to rattle the windowpanes now. And don't you dare go blabbing about it. I told you, it's just a hunch, I may be wrong. What, the great Haruno Sakura? Wrong. May lightning strike me dead. Ino winked at her. Don't worry, I won't tell a soul. Sakura smiled. Though they still had their squabbles, she and Ino were growing closer and closer as the years went by. I told you because I can't figure out why it's a problem for him. Sakura slumped over and put her hand over her teacup. Steam fogged under and around her fingers. Well, that's obvious. Ino leaned back with her own tea. They're both men. Sakura frowned. I don't think it's as simple as duh. Oi. Both women whipped their heads around to view the newcomer, then let their mouths fall open. Shika. Ino jumped up and rushed over to the shadow ninja, who was wearing his usual look of pained annoyance and about 14 assorted packages on his back. What's all this? Why are you? Did you go to get the shipment by yourself? You brought everything at once. Well, you were busy here. Shikamaru answered in a bored tone, though almost bent double from the load of small urns and large stone tablets. Where do you want this stuff? I'm not going to pay you extra for getting here fast, you know. Ino snapped angrily at him as she removed packages and placed them anywhere she could. Sakura had to rescue the teacups and kettle from being crushed under a marble slab. Seriously, how could you be so stupid? These blocks weigh 10 pounds each. Shikamaru shrugged and flexed his shoulders. I didn't want you to have to carry them. Ino blinked. A flush suddenly made its way across Shikamaru's face. I mean, it'd be troublesome to make 3 trips, you know. One to come get you, one for us to go back, one for us to carry it all here. His eyes traveled around the shop as if trying to escape and rested briefly on Sakura, who nodded and smiled at him. He nodded back and without looking at Ino, stepped out of the shop. So I'll be here at 10 tomorrow. Okay. Don't be late. Ino's voice was oddly quiet. Sakura waited until her friend had reseated herself before giving her a Naruto-ish grin. What was that? Ino's baby blue eyes snapped dangerously quickly back onto Sakura's green ones. What was what? She demanded. I have no idea. I don't understand him at all. He's really smart and yet so dumb. She began to gather up the items she had haphazardly placed everywhere, muttering about how stupid men were and if he had dropped the load it would have cost her a fortune and how could he be so brilliant and so stupid at the same time. Sakura could not smother her smile as she put the tea items back on the table. But as she remembered what had brought her here, the smile faded. Her intuitiveness told her that things could not be so simple, so natural, for Sasuke and Naruto. Whatever happened between them would not include the things that made her smile. Things like Shikamaru embarrassed to be caught doing a favor for Ino. Whatever happened between Sasuke and Naruto would be explosive and powerful, because that was the kind of people they were, and it would either break them or weld them together. Of that much, she was sure. Sakura rolled her eyes as a shattering crash broke through her thoughts, followed by Ino's screams of outrage. As she rose to help her friend, she happened to glance out the windows of the shop and suddenly made an exclamation of surprise. Hyuga Hinata was walking down the street, escorted by several Sand Village ninja. Hyuga-san, Sakura called, waving her hand. The timid young woman turned, a smile transforming her face. Haruno-san, she said delightedly. She spoke briefly to the group around her, all of whom nodded and continued down the street save one who walked with her into the shop. Sakura's smile became very, very fixed as she recognized Gaara. Ino, who had been cursing at Sakura for inviting people in when the shop was in such a state, masterfully changed her attitude and tone of voice as the little bell over the door rang. Irashima, se. She squeaked as she turned and also recognized the infamous Sand Shinobi. There was a terse silence, then Hinata's small, unsure voice piped up. Anyo, it's a pleasure to see you two again. It's been a while. Seriously, it's been weeks. Ino mastered her voice tone, and her sociable nature took charge. Come on, sit down, I'll get more cups. Oh, the tea's cold, hang on just a second. Ino disappeared into the back room, leaving Sakura with Hinata and Gaara. None of them said a word. Hinata began to rub her index fingers together, a sure sign that she was nervous. Sakura, on the other hand, stared openly at Gaara, who returned her stare with cool eyes. Though immensely respectful of the Sand Shinobi, she had never quite forgiven him for hurting Lee so badly, and the knowledge that he had once tried to start a war in Konoha made her extremely wary of him. Not to mention he had also tried to kill her once. Gaara's gaze suddenly broke from Sakura's to look out the windows into the street. Where is Uzumaki? He asked. Hinata's shoulders perked up, and she looked up at Sakura with an eager expression. He's off by himself behind the school, probably in the woods. Training. Sakura did not mention that Naruto had failed his second Junin field trial test. It would only depress Hinata, and she never really liked telling Gaara anything. She picked up her cold tea and took a sip. Is he well? Hinata asked. Sakura turned to her with a smile. He's the same as always. Or maybe not, she thought as she remembered the brief but poignant hurt she had seen in his eyes not so long ago. Gaara's monotone voice interrupted her thoughts. Where is Uchiha? He inquired. I think he's at the Junin Academy. Sakura answered. That's where he usually is at this time. The red-haired sand ninja rose. Sakura instantly jumped to her feet. The black-rimmed eyes narrowed in a sinister smile as Gaara held up a hand. Don't worry, I just need to deliver a message to him. That's all. He turned to look down at Hinata. You will be safe here. I shall meet you at the village gate in 20 minutes. Hinata nodded and smiled at him. He did not smile back, but rested his hand briefly on her shoulder before stepping out of the shop. Sakura watched him go with a frown on her face, wondering if she ought to follow him, but her train of thought was stopped by Hinata's small voice. Anyo, she pleaded softly but earnestly. Please, please trust in him. I know he's done horrible things, but he's changed so much, just give him a chance. Inner Sakura grumbled with 1,000 misgivings, but Sakura gave Hinata a gentle smile. I know, he's with you after all. The pale-eyed woman blushed and smiled, rubbing her fingers together again in embarrassment. She was undergoing training to be a Konoha delegate, and she had been assigned to communications with the Sand Country, a measure taken to re-establish trust after the attempted war. Consequently, she and Gaara had forged a close relationship, which had not surprised Sakura. Though Hinata was fond of Naruto, and had wanted to ease the pain of his early life, she had found a similar hurt in Gaara that needed her attention more than Naruto's did. And in trying to heal Gaara's pain, she had realized who she had been destined for. But Hinata still loved Naruto dearly. And she knew him quite well, though she had little communication with him. And she knew, it was the reason it was not so hard to give him up. She leaned forward. Anyo, truthfully, is Naruto-kun all right? Sakura glanced at her, then closed her eyes and sighed, not really. Is it about Uchiha-kun? Sakura's pale green eyes dilated with shock as she froze, her tea halfway to her mouth. How do you? I've known that for a long time, Hinata said gently, smiling to herself. I don't think even Naruto-kun realizes it. Realizes what? Sakura put her cup down and clasped her hands around it. That Uchiha-kun is important to him. Hinata's pale eyes met Sakura's vibrant ones. That he probably cares for him above all others. You mean? Sakura's fingers loosened on the cup. You mean that Naruto doesn't realize that he has feelings for Sasuke-kun? Well, that's the way I see it. Hinata smiled. Naruto-kun can be a bit blind to this kind of thing. And he's good at denying things, especially to himself. There was a clatter, then Ino emerged triumphantly with cups, a kettle of hot tea and rice crackers. I couldn't find any snacks, she complained as she sat down. My mom must have gotten to them. I had to break into my own private stash. As Hinata immediately began apologizing, Sakura took the opportunity to lose herself in thought. Is that what's bothering Sasuke-kun? She wondered. Is it because he doesn't know what Naruto thinks? No, there had been confusion in Sasuke's eyes, as if Sasuke himself didn't know what was going on. What was he thinking? What were they both thinking? Sakura stole a glance over at Hinata, who was tentatively nibbling at a rice cracker. Hinata feels sure about Naruto, but is it really that? Or is it something simpler, like he just wants Sasuke's acknowledgement? Maybe I should ask. She shook her head. No, I won't do anything. I shouldn't. This is something they have to work out themselves. But even as she resolved this, an inner Sakura reluctantly seconded it. She couldn't help feeling a little prickle of trepidation, because Naruto and Sasuke were both so powerful, they both had the power to break each other beyond repair. What's going to happen to them? She wondered. So there it is. This is the only chapter that I have misgivings about, though. I'm pretty happy with the way the rest of the story is going. Foreboding, Sasuke twirled a shuriken on his finger, contemplating the weapon-studded target before him. He had missed 3 times, extremely unusual for him. In one fluid motion, he whirled and hurled his weapon at the door. Gaara caught the shuriken on his finger, lounging nonchalantly against the doorframe. I was here for 5 seconds. Gaara flipped the throwing blade back at Sasuke and slouched into the room. You must be off today. Something like that. Sasuke grunted as he sheathed the shuriken and waited for Gaara to come up to him. What are you doing in Konoha? Escorting the delegates. Gaara came to a halt. But we also had to deliver a message to your Junin. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. I don't work in the office, I'm Anbu. This message pertains to you especially. Gaara smiled one of his rare, rather sinister smiles. So I thought I'd give it to you personally. Bemused, Sasuke nodded. Gaara handed him a small scroll. We found 2 of Orochimaru's men. The sand ninja motioned for Sasuke to open the scroll. We took care of one, but the other escaped. Sasuke's fingers wrinkled the parchment as his hand tightened. Though Orochimaru had been taken care of last year, his disbanded followers still roamed the land, trying to carry out his last wishes. There were warrants out for them in every country, so it was not easy for them to hide, but they were extremely dangerous individuals, so they were not easy to capture. The one that escaped is powerful, but his mind snapped after Orochimaru was killed. He may or may not be a threat. Gaara continued. He's headed this way. Sasuke nodded. There were plenty of Junin here. Now that they were properly warned, they would be able to take care of one rogue shinobi. Unju Kogaku, he read. Age, 39. Weight, 130 pounds. Height, 162 centimeters. Abilities, unknown. Origin, Sound Country. I never saw this one.
he muttered, addressing Gaara without looking at him. Do you know his patterns, techniques?
No, Gaara's eyes narrowed. His partner did all the attacking when we encountered them. We were not able to see his jutsu. Pity. Sasuke rolled up the parchment. Then, seeing as Gaara did not say anything nor make a move to leave, he raised an eyebrow inquisitively. Gaara was smiling slightly. That's the end of the official report, he told Sasuke. But there's something else that I thought you'd be interested in. Really? The Uchiha walked up to the target he'd been practicing on and began to remove the weapons embedded in it. Like what? He's after Uzumaki. Gaara's smile widened only slightly as he watched Sasuke's shoulders tense. How do you know that? Sasuke asked softly. By what his partner said. Gaara turned away and began to walk to the door. She yelled at him to continue on to Konoha, to find Uzumaki, and then died before saying why. Sasuke did not say anything, and Gaara did not turn around again. But the sand ninja did pause before stepping over the threshold. Whatever they want from him, it can't be good for either of you, he said over his shoulder. It's Orochimaru, after all. After Gaara left, Sasuke simply stared at the target before him, the straw doll that vaguely resembled a man. His eyes focused on the doll's left shoulder, just below the neck. His eyes suddenly glowed with the fire of the Sharingan. I will not let you touch us anymore, Orochimaru, he vowed. You are dead, and you will stay that way. The last member of the Uchiha clan turned and proudly stalked from the room, clutching a cold hand to the left side of his neck. Iruka dumped his bag onto the floor, turned swiftly and locked the door to the apartment. After a moment's thought, he threw the bolt as well. He usually did not lock his door and the act felt alien to him, but whatever protection he could offer to Naruto, he would. He moved through the living room to the kitchen and dining area, intending to lock the window as well. He was so jumpy that when Naruto addressed him, he leapt 2 feet and instantly pulled out some kunai from his leg pouch.
Hey Iruka-sensei. Naruto's eyes squinted up as he tried to puzzle out what demons disturbed his sensei now, then gave up and turned back to the steaming pan in front of him. Curry okay?
Yes, great, Iruka said weakly, cursing inwardly. He had been so determined to act normal so that Naruto would not begin to guess what was bothering him, but so much for that. Well, Naruto was always slow on the uptake, so hopefully he wouldn't notice. Iruka continued to the window and put his hand to the bolt. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Naruto said distractedly, reaching for some salt. Kakashi-sensei won't be able to get in.
Oh, you're right, Iruka laughed as he turned away from the window. Then he stiffened and said in a much altered voice, Imea, what? Why would Kakashi try to get in?
To see you, of course. Naruto's brows knit together as he stirred his concoction. Why would you think he'd want to come here if he wanted to see me? Iruka tried to laugh but failed miserably. There was a great hiss and Naruto cursed. Then he smiled in relief and took the pan off the stove. Well, he's been coming in for the past 3 months, right? If you lock the window.
How on earth do you know that? Iruka screamed, pointing at Naruto. The blonde ninja sighed. Iruka-sensei, I'm not blind, ya know. And you really should be more open about it, you've been together for a year now.
How on earth do you know that? Iruka's face was dead white, making the scar over his nose much more prominent. Naruto sighed again as he poured the curry over some leftover rice. To tell the truth, I think the whole village knows, he said unfeelingly. There was a loud thump behind him. Naruto figured that his sensei had fainted, but he was wrong. Iruka had sunk into a chair and was staring straight ahead at nothing.
Kami-sama, the older man breathed. Naruto grinned as he opened the top of a cup ramen and began to pour hot water into it. You can just call me Naruto, you know, he said lightly.
When Iruka didn't respond, Naruto rolled his eyes. Iruka-sensei, get over it. If you act as if it's a bad thing, I'm gonna think it's a bad thing, ya know. Do you, though? Naruto opened his eyes a crack to behold his teacher staring almost pleadingly at him. Because we can. Naruto snorted. If I really didn't like it, I would have told you a year ago. He brought his ramen and Iruka's dinner over to the table and sat down. Itadakimasu.
Iruka repeated the phrase automatically, but didn't eat. He had been so sure that he had been treading carefully around Naruto, and Naruto wasn't the most perceptive person. Are you ashamed of him? Brown eyes met blue.
Iruka asked, though he'd heard the question. Are you ashamed of him? Naruto was pointing his chopsticks at Iruka as if accusing him. And don't give me bullshit, he added as an afterthought. Steam rose off the forgotten food as silence filled the room. Iruka's gaze had dropped to his curry after Naruto's question, but now he raised his eyes and locked them on Naruto's face, as if assuring the blonde shinobi that every word he spoke was true. It would be a lie to say that I'm perfectly comfortable with it. There was an almost abashed tone in Iruka's voice, yet his gaze didn't waver.
But it's nothing compared to how I feel about Kakashi, how much I care about him. His voice grew stronger, and even if the entire village laughed at me, I wouldn't give him up. I wouldn't be able to. Naruto noticed that Iruka's fists clenched. But it's different with you, Naruto. You're with me now, and the last thing I want is for you to be jeered at or hurt because of my wants and needs. Naruto's eyes widened, while Iruka's closed. No, I'm not ashamed of him. But if it bothers you.
I said don't bullshit me. Naruto slammed his chopsticks on the table. I said that if I didn't like it, I would have told you. I mean, why do you always have to have my goddamn approval? You're human too? A half-smile tugged at the corners of Iruka's mouth. I'm sorry, Naruto, he said quietly. I should have trusted you.
Damn straight. Naruto's eyes closed as he dug into his ramen in a huff. Iruka smiled, then picked up his own chopsticks and began to work on his fish cake curry. Naruto could cook, but he was adamant about using ramen ingredients in non-ramen foods. It was just something that Iruka had to deal with.
Naruto finished long before Iruka, but he didn't clear his place right away as usual. Instead, he folded his arms on the table and rested his head on them, musing in a very un-Naruto-like way. A wave of worry and fear suddenly made the food in Iruka's mouth turn to ashes as he remembered the warning from the Sand Country.
Why were people always after Naruto? Couldn't they leave well enough alone? Was the fact that he shared the power of a demon fox enough to mark him for the rest of his days? Would he never know what it meant to be perfectly ordinary? Anyo saw, Iruka-sensei. Naruto's voice broke through Iruka's panicked fretting. Despite the ball of worry lodged in his throat, he managed to swallow his current mouthful and answer coherently. Yes. What does it feel like to be in love? The unexpected question made the ball drop into Iruka's stomach. He set his chopsticks down and took a long drink of water before answering.
It's like, for me, it's like I have a new body. A fresh body that feels softer, so that everything in my life feels sharper and newer to me. All the good stuff, all the pain, it's amplified. I think it's because, it's like my heart got bigger because it became one with his. With Kakashi's, I mean. He added, as if it wasn't obvious. Kakashi doesn't have a heart. Naruto mused, thinking of his former teacher's 1,000 years of pain jutsu.
Hey, Iruka began hotly. The younger man smiled, but if he takes yours, it's certainly big enough for two.
The Junin blushed, but the color faded rapidly from his face as he watched Naruto's eyes glaze over, watched him sink back into a reverie that looked troubled and turbulent. You know, Iruka looked down at his almost empty plate. Kakashi waited a long time to tell me how he felt. I wish he hadn't. He stole a glance at Naruto. If you want to tell someone how you feel, I don't think you should hold back. There was no response, which was surprising enough, but when Iruka lifted his head to look at his student, he was unprepared for the face that greeted him, a face completely devoid of expression save an intense alarm glowing in the blue depths of Naruto's eyes. I have no idea what you're talking about, Naruto said in a much too controlled voice. Iruka was only stunned for a moment. Then he sighed inwardly. So it's true, then, Kakashi. Taking advantage of the silence, Naruto pushed himself up roughly and moved to the window. I'll be outside, he said over his shoulder as he slid the glass back and leapt out into the night. Iruka came back to reality in a hurry and jumped up to drag him back, but was blocked by Kakashi's body, perched on the sill. He and Naruto must have passed each other in the air.
It's okay, the silver-haired Junin assured the nearly panic-stricken Iruka. Sasuke's down there. He hopped down from the window and brushed himself off, expecting an explosion of some sort from Iruka. After hearing nothing, he looked up.
Iruka had turned away and was staring at Naruto's empty ramen cup. Kakashi watched him for a minute, then stepped close to him and enfolded him in his arms from behind. What? He asked. You were right. Iruka closed his eyes and brought his hand up to grip one of Kakashi's. You were right about Naruto. I tend to be with this kind of thing. Kakashi's grip tightened, became more possessive. Does it bother you? That's not it. Iruka sighed. I think he's in pain about it. That hurts me. His hand left Kakashi's and rose higher, stretching up to the covered face. I thought it would be simpler between them. Kakashi paused and instinctively closed his eyes as Iruka's fingers hooked over the top of his face mask and dragged it down to his neck. But Sasuke's making this hard for himself. Hard for Naruto, too. He breathed out a small sigh. Or, I might have been wrong in his case. Iruka's hand trailed slowly down Kakashi's face, then dropped back down. I hope you're not, he whispered. Kakashi didn't answer, didn't reassure him, but simply pressed his cheek against Iruka's, cradling the brown-haired Junin in his embrace and letting him lean against his chest. What will it take for Sasuke and Naruto to know this joy? Iruka thought sadly. Could the maze of walls and barriers between them be broken? Or were they doomed to fall off the thin bridge between love and hate, and never find their way back? When Naruto's feet touched the ground, a shadow darted forward. Naruto's hand automatically flashed to his leg pouch, but he relaxed as he recognized the chakra. Sasuke didn't leave the cover of the tree he stood under, but the moon's light filtering through the leaves dappled him with bits of white. His eyes were glowing red. What's with the Sharingan? Naruto asked. Can't see in the dark. I'm practicing. Sasuke answered coolly. It was something he'd do, so Naruto didn't ask further. But Sasuke was trying to see as well as he could in the dark. Not all abilities were visible, and a skilled shinobi would be able to do a lot under the cover of night. HMPH. Naruto's eyes squinted up. Go practice somewhere else. No thanks. Fine. Asshole. Naruto vaulted up into the tree and began to head for the forest, springboarding off other trees to reach a thicker canopy. He could hear Sasuke not too far behind him. All right, he thought. I can deal with you. Like the flirtatious frolicking of the wind, Naruto led Sasuke on a merry dance through Konoha's abundant foliage, jumping lightly from tree to tree without much effort. He enjoyed doing this. It made him feel like a creature of the forest, wild and free. And somewhere deep inside him, he knew of another being that enjoyed the sensation of roaming through the deep night just for the hell of it. After 10 minutes of mindless jumping, though, Naruto's feeling of freedom was giving way to utter annoyance. He scowled in anger and dove to the ground. Sasuke followed him down and leaned casually against a tree trunk, standing just out of reach, Sharingan still glowing hotly. Why the hell are you following me around? Naruto's temper reached breaking point. Sasuke shrugged, knowing it would further irritate the blonde shinobi. I'm bored, he said. You just get sick pleasure out of messing with me. Naruto sneered. Get lost. Sasuke said nothing. Naruto glared at him for a few more seconds, then flopped into a cross-legged position on the forest floor. Stuck-up bastard. He shot at Sasuke. Usura Tonkachi. Naruto's organs roiled in anger, but for lack of a better comeback, he stuck out his tongue at the quiet Uchiha. A smile suddenly flashed across Sasuke's face. It startled Naruto so much that all his anger dissipated instantly. What? He asked. Sasuke had instantly tried to drop the smile, but the corners of his mouth kept twitching threateningly. What? Is there something on my face? Naruto had risen to his feet. The black-haired shinobi shook his head, still trying to contain his grin. You're so, he muttered. I'm so, what? Naruto asked defensively, childish. But the word had come out softly, almost affectionately. As if Sasuke liked Naruto this way, as if it was his fond delight that Naruto had not lost the immature if not enthusiastic spitfire he was known for in his youth. It was moments like these that Naruto both cherished and despised, the moments where Sasuke would lose his disdainful exterior and show him emotion other than scorn and anger. Things like laughter, happiness, and something that felt far too good to be true. The silence between them now felt too much like that warm silence they'd shared so many nights ago under a glorious moon. Naruto hated it, loved it, and was so deeply, deeply afraid of it. What am I to you, Sasuke? Naruto asked softly. The Uchiha tensed, all mirth gone from his face. What? What am I to you? Naruto repeated, locking his vividly blue eyes with Sasuke's black ones and holding them for a long moment.
Blue sky meeting deep midnight. Aside from the gentle chuckling of a nearby river, there was no sound between them.
And when Sasuke didn't answer, Naruto let his eyes close. Just get lost, he said curtly. I can't deal with your crap. Naruto leapt back into the trees and began traveling back towards his home. This time, Sasuke did not follow, for the heavy weight of fear was spreading through his chest once more, had extended its force through his limbs and anchored him to the ground. He had to stop this. For both of them. So that's it, a thin, sickly voice rasped. The speaker watched the young man with glowing red eyes take to the canopy before emerging from the river he was submerged in. The water flowing around his body camouflaged his chakra to a point, so his target would not have noticed him if he attacked with the proper speed. He had been ready. His nerves finally turned to the young man carrying the great nine tails. He was about to lash out from the water with the speed of a cobra's strike. But when the Uchiha had arrived, he could do nothing. He had heard the tales of the young man's prowess, and he knew better than to attack directly. It was his business to know such things because he was a master of stealth and covert assassinations. He was a wisp of a man, thin and pale, limbs trembling. The protector across his forehead seemed too large for its purpose. His bloodshot eyes glowed pink as his nose twitched in a rodent-like fashion. And he was mad. Strings of slobber fell constantly from his lips, and he uttered small, nervous laughs at random moments. He tottered as the chakra prepared for attacking left him, too weak and hungry to stand properly. He hadn't eaten in days. He, Anju Kogaku, was the last stronghold of the Village of Sound, or so he constantly reassured himself. It was up to him to carry out Orochimaru-sama's plans. Never mind that he was sick, he was a brilliant man. Orochimaru-sama had said it himself many a time, that Kogaku was vital to his backup plan if something was to go wrong. Tears rose in Kogaku's eyes. His leader, his mentor had much confidence in him, and now he was dead. Dead. Kogaku knew that he had fallen into madness when the news of Orochimaru's death had come to him, but he had nursed himself back to complete health. Yes, he was fine. And when the Village of Sound had met for the last time to carry out Orochimaru-sama's backup plan, he had told himself to be strong, for his leader's sake. He absolutely had to carry out the mission, especially now that his companion had fallen to the Sand Shinobi on their way to Konoha.
Kogaku didn't care very much about that. True, the woman with him would have helped because he was so physically weak, but everyone knew that his jutsu was unstoppable. He didn't need anyone. Probably even Orochimaru-sama had been slightly afraid of his power. His cracked, dry lips spread out as he grinned and savored this colorful fantasy. Yes, even the great Orochimaru-sama had respected Anju Kogaku. Suddenly, the great Kogaku whirled and plunged back into the river, dragging his hands alongside the banks and clawing at the soft mud. He let out a cry of delight and raised his fist high, a small frog clenched in his grip.
Dinner. And as he bit into the slimy, wriggling flesh, he pondered what he'd seen tonight. He knew that his target, Uzumaki, was the Uchiha's companion, but their comradeship seemed to go beyond that. Did Orochimaru-sama know of this? Well, it didn't matter much as far as the plan went. Kogaku swallowed and dropped the bones of the hapless amphibian into the water. If he was right, he might be able to manipulate Uchiha into compliance instead of. No, why should he? Uchiha was afraid of him too. Just like everyone else was. Just like everyone else. Kogaku could handle him, and once he could finish the mission alone and watch the others writhe in jealousy and deference to him. Ragged laughter escaped from his throat as he basked in his future glory. He would complete his plan regarding Uzumaki, and he would deal with Uchiha alone, unaided, glorious. Kogaku stood absolutely still, the water flowing around him enveloping him in a cushion of cold support. He sighed happily, then began to cast about again. Resolved, Sasuke determined that things were now getting out of hand. His behavior was absolutely ridiculous. Not unfounded, because someone did have to keep an eye on Naruto, but he was actually watching over the fool of his own free will. Initially, he had called it arrogance. No one could do a better job than he could, but he knew that wasn't true. There were others that would give their souls to keep that dobe out of harm's way, and they were no less skilled than he was. Even if they were, their feelings about that idiot made up for it. Well, it wasn't like he wouldn't feel the same. There. Again with the weird behavior. Again with the strange thoughts. This just had to stop. Well, perhaps it wasn't so strange to feel a bit protective, because Naruto did mean a lot to him when he really thought about it. He often wondered when that had come about. Perhaps it was when Shikamaru's team had brought him back to Konoha, when Naruto had turned to him and said so roughly, so obnoxiously, "We're home, asshole. This is where you belong. Now go apologize to Sakura-chan." Or perhaps it went back further than that, back to the training together, fighting with each other, stealing each other's personal belongings. Who knew that Naruto collected that much manga? All that time spent together in their teens. Or maybe it had happened recently, after Sasuke had become Anbu and Team 7 was disbanded, only a year ago. Perhaps the shock of losing the daily presence of the loud, annoying Yuzuru Tonkatsu made him realize how necessary Naruto was in his everyday life, how vital it was that Naruto tell him, for instance, what he'd had for breakfast every single goddamn day and what he had planned for lunch to boot, which was of course ramen with extra noodles. It didn't even matter when, actually. What mattered was that Naruto had crawled into his heart somehow and had rooted there like a weed, ornery and stubborn and strong. But it was only to be expected, right? They had shared so much, their lives, their hopes, hatreds and understandings of each other. It was logical to consider Naruto as a necessary being in his life, right?
That didn't seem to settle right with his Avenger mindset. He was Uchiha Sasuke. He was not supposed to need anyone.
And yet, as often as he told himself this, it did not change anything. And he tried to be so careful not to show anything, as if by not acknowledging his feelings, they didn't exist. But it was getting harder and harder to hide now. The things that he had been able to explain away long ago made less sense as the years went by. It was no longer thoughtfulness that compelled him to provide companionship. It wasn't arrogance that made him want to protect. Not a desire for power that created the need for the Yuzuru Tonkatsu, for Naruto. He needed him. But did need equal love? And this was the barrier that Sasuke refused to cross, the edge of the cliff so to speak. Yes, he cared about Naruto deeply. Yes, he was willing to fight and die for him, as a close friend and comrade. But love was going too far. Unreasonably far. Ridiculously far. It was impossible. Hence his discomfort during Naruto's last field trial, where he had heard something innocent and unassuming and had instantly panicked. Naruto hadn't meant anything, and yet the moment had filled him with such cursed happiness, and then he'd freaked out.
Why was he so afraid? Because everything that I had told myself to believe had been destroyed in that 1 second. He had the power to do that. Something in me had the power to do that.
It had to be suppressed. Yes. He had to focus on reality. He was an Uchiha, last of his clan. He had obligations to fulfill. But even that seemed to be a poor excuse in the eyes of some. What do you have in mind for the future? Sasuke did not look up from his bento. Lunch break was short. He had a long patrol scheduled and he was too hungry to waste any time not eating. What's it to you? He asked with his mouth partially full. Hyuga Neji, on the other hand, did not seem to care about food at the moment. His pale eyes seemed to watch something in the far distance. They were sitting on the rooftop of the Junin Academy, where Sasuke usually ate alone, but Neji had joined him today. Will you marry? Neji asked abruptly. Sasuke choked. Neji made no move to help as the usually composed shinobi hacked and drank half a canteen of water. What did you say? Sasuke wiped his mouth. What does that have to do with anything?
It is something that you and I must consider. Neji was taciturn as usual, but Sasuke did not want to just let things slide. What are you talking about? He asked, completely bemused. The pale white eyes that distinguished the Hyuga clan slid shut. You and I are of advanced bloodlines. It is therefore vital that we produce heirs.
Sasuke sat very still. It was not a concept that he'd never heard before, but it was the first time that he had realized how significant it was to him. He had not really considered the future unless it involved Itachi. He had no other goals to work forward to save becoming an Anbu, and he had done that. Was he then destined to become an Uchiha breeding machine? He didn't realize that Neji had been watching him until the Hyuga began to speak. I see you haven't given it much thought, he said, a touch smugly. Sasuke grew defensive. What about you then? Why are you bringing this up? Neji turned his face away, staring at his hands. I wanted to see what you wanted to do with your life.
Utterly lost, Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Why? The pale-eyed Anbu did not look up. If you were to marry, you would choose a woman of highest caliber and intellect, would you not? You would not only want to pass your bloodline through her, you would want to complement it with the most outstanding traits that she could offer.
Sasuke nodded. Neji placed his hands on his knees and pushed himself up only to stroll slowly to the railing of the rooftop. I was introduced to such a woman today, he said softly. Sasuke put his bento aside. Your family is arranging a marriage? The woman I met today underwent the Hyuga clan's strict processing and passed with flying colors. She is intelligent, has formidable technique, and she's beautiful. Neji gripped the railing and braced himself against it, watching the empty blue sky. Sasuke was quiet. It was all in what Neji did not say that said it for him.
He loves someone else. Almost as if Neji could read the other's thoughts, he whirled around and pierced Sasuke with his penetrating stare. You and I both used to think that power meant everything, he said almost fiercely. Do you still believe it, as an Uchiha?
A blur of memories raced through Sasuke's mind. His dead parents. Sakura's laughter. Itachi. Kakashi's tardiness. Orochimaru. The war. Naruto's fox-slitted eyes. Darkness and then redemption. But, yes, Sasuke answered softly after a moment of silence. There is no other way for people like us. Neji snorted. You lie. Stunned, Sasuke rose and stared Neji in his pale eyes. No one calls me a liar. And yet you are lying. Neji's lips curved into a sneer. You're lying to both me and yourself. I can see it. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Where the hell do you get off calling me that? Neji turned his back on Sasuke. You have been around him too long to think that way any longer, he said quietly over his shoulder. What? Sasuke exploded. Who are you? His voice stopped as he realized who Neji was referring to. The Hyuga sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Sometimes I regret listening to that idiot, he said reflectively. Sasuke regained his voice. What are you talking about? I'm not really sure. Neji stared at the rooftops of Konoha, unstructured and mismatched and yet fitting against the blue sky. It was so much easier when I didn't regard my own feelings, and then that fool opened my eyes. Opened my eyes and showed me how to see myself in the darkness. So what are you saying? Sasuke asked warily. Neji turned slightly to regard the dark-eyed Uchiha, and after a moment, he smiled. I think I may try being an idiot, the Hyuga mused. What? I'm going to refuse the marriage, Neji said patiently. Sasuke was dumbfounded. You mean, you're going to go against the main house? He asked incredulously. But that won't be easy, I know. That is of no consequence to me. There is no situation I cannot handle. Neji's voice had regained its icy haughtiness. I shall relish it as a challenge. I will not give up despite what others think of me. That is what you taught me, Naruto. And I will win. Sasuke could not say anything, and instead let stunned silence portray his current state of mind. Little cotton balls of mist sailed slowly through the blue waters of the sky, and only the sun was heavier than the quiet. After what seemed like an eternity, Neji flipped gracefully up onto the railing and faced the rooftops of Konoha. I wish you luck, Uchiha, in whatever you do, he said without turning around. I hope you find a light to guide you. And the Hyuga leapt out into the golden afternoon. All right, fine. Maybe Naruto did influence him. Perhaps he did remind Sasuke of things that could not be compromised for power. But that did not mean that Naruto was one of those things. Or, he was. He was vital to Sasuke. But he didn't love him or anything. He didn't, he couldn't, he wasn't that strong. Because if he did allow himself to fall over the edge, if he let the floodgates of his heart open, who knew what he might do? Who knew how badly he would be hurt? And he would be hurt. There was no possibility of Naruto harboring similar emotions, and the end result inevitably would be Naruto running from such a scenario. Running from him. He was Uchiha, yes. But even he wasn't strong enough to take that. He could not afford to lose the only light powerful enough to overpower his own dark soul. So he would watch over Naruto for now, and he would keep up his walls and defenses, and he would make himself impenetrable. And if he fell, he would be the first to run instead. Shikamaru, Tensai of Konoha, was backed up completely against the back wall of Konoha's flower shop. Sweat stood out on his forehead as he licked his dry lips, his eyes darting around to seek escape. You're not getting out of this one, Shika. The shadow nin's eyes snapped forward to view his adversary, a blonde shinobi with a rather sinister smirk, who was not more than 6 inches away from his nose. From this distance, her eyes were even clearer, her face was absolutely perfect, like a heavenly Tenyo. Kami-sama, he had to get out of here, he cursed at his stupidity. He had figured that Ino might have seen Naruto around, and so he'd asked after him.
Shikamaru knew that Naruto was dealing with something because he was so quiet as of late, which was a mythical occurrence. He also knew that when Naruto was troubled, he'd usually pour his soul out to Sakura. Then Sakura would talk to Ino, and then Ino would know all sides of the issue and would have the most up-to-date information. Thus, Shikamaru figured there was no harm in asking about Naruto's state of being. Much as he pretended not to be, he was worried about the idiot. But he should have worried more about himself. Now Ino was on his case, and he didn't like it when she was completely focused on him. It made him extremely nervous. Actually, it made him giddy with fear. He had the distinct impression that she could see through his mask of indifference and read what lay behind it.
He did not want her to know. You know what, never mind. I gotta get going. Shikamaru made his voice as nonchalant as he could. Gotta, do lots of things. You know something, don't you? Ino stepped even closer, making Shikamaru's insides compact exponentially. You know something about this, don't you? Shikamaru swallowed, desperately trying to look annoyed. What are you blabbering about now, damn it? When Ino made no further comment, he made his lips curve into a poor smile. This better not be about Uchiha again. Ino's eyes narrowed. Stop trying to change the subject. Why in the world would you ask me how Naruto was doing? Shikamaru opened his mouth to answer, then seemed to change his mind halfway. No reason. Just making small talk. Shika. Refusing to let his countenance blanch, he tried to put her off once more. Like I said, never mind. I really need to go. He froze, partly in shock, but also partly because Ino had grabbed his face in her hands and it was hard to move his head. How do you know? She demanded. Cat was out of the bag now. Shikamaru sighed. Of course Ino's father would have told her about the warning from the Sand Country and that there were people after Naruto again. After all, his father had told him about it. Perhaps even the whole village knew. Geez, Ino, how else do you think I'd find out? From my dad. The shadow nin snorted. He was totally flabbergasted when Ino released his head and clapped her hands to her mouth instead. The whole village, you're kidding. Well, it's probably for the better, he said quickly, puzzled by her distress but wanting to reassure her quickly. That way, the whole village can keep an eye on high.
Better. This is the worst thing that could happen. Ino threw her hands into the air. What should we do? Sakura will kill me, and that's the stupid part, I didn't say a word. And Sasuke-kun, oh my gosh, if he thinks that I did it, he'll despise me for the rest of my life and beyond. Shikamaru forced another smile that came out more like a grimace. I don't think Uchiha would care much about the village knowing. Are you kidding me? Ino's voice rose in scandalized tones. I'd seriously care if something like that got out to the village. Ino, you make no sense. It's better that the village knows. We can watch over that dolt a lot easier this way. It was Ino's turn to look flabbergasted. Who, do you mean Naruto? What do you mean, watch over him? Watch over. To protect, to guard, to keep from harm. That's not what I mean and you know it. What do you mean, like protecting him from Sasuke-kun? Why the hell would anyone protect Naruto from Uchiha? I don't know, you keep bringing it up. Shikamaru began to rub the back of his neck, his physical indication of annoyance. I don't understand a word you're saying. You're the one that makes no sense. See, this is why I told you to forget it. Forget it? Do you know how much this is going to hurt Sasuke-kun? Shikamaru was silent. Ino was about to launch into another lungful of scolding, but the heated words diffused out of her as she watched him, watched as something in him seemed to fade. Why'd I even bother? She heard him mutter. Mendoku's. He stretched his neck from side to side and turned his eyes on her again. This isn't about Uchiha, he said harshly. I think if you want to help, we'd better concentrate on watching over Naruto. Shika, if you don't explain what in Kami-sama's name you mean by watching over Naruto, I will mind transfer into you and find out myself. This was the threat that always got him. For some reason that Ino knew not,
Shikamaru was terrified of her using her jutsu on him. He had a great way of not showing it, though. In response, he rolled his eyes. We have to watch over him because one of that snake guy's men is after him, remember? He explained patiently.
There was a profound silence. Then the entire shop shook with the force of Ino's surprise. What? She screamed.
Crap, said Shikamaru. His father was going to kill him. Now the whole village would know. After a lot of unintelligible muttering and screaming, Ino was informed of the situation. But why? She asked, horrified. Why are they after him again?
Dunno. Shikamaru slouched over to the reception counter and leaned against it. But people are always after him, so it's actually no surprise. Shikamaru had gained a lot of respect for Naruto over the years, mainly because of the idiot's drive to excel. The Tensei had never suspected that Naruto would be capable of such dedication when they were younger, but by now he had learned not to be surprised by anything his loud, annoying comrade did. Naruto was still an obnoxious fool, but he had shaken everyone's image of him over and over again. It was too troublesome to be surprised by his accomplishments anymore.
And yet, Shikamaru had never figured out what exactly was in Uzumaki that was wanted by so many others. True, Naruto had inhuman chakra stamina, and was taught by the legendary Sennin Jiraiya-sama, and was a close comrade of Uchiha Sasuke. Wait. Hang on, he said aloud, slowly. What if they're trying to get Uchiha again by using Naruto? What? Ino had also slumped into silent speculation, but now her eyes snapped back onto his face with alarming intensity. What did you say? Maybe they're after Uchiha again. Shikamaru's brow furrowed. Maybe they're using Naruto as a ploy to make Uchiha careless. It makes more sense that they'd be after him because of, well. There was no point in saying it aloud because it was just painful for most years, that Sasuke had once left Konoha to become a follower of Orochimaru. But Shikamaru and his hand-picked team had brought him back. That part of Sasuke's life was over. Probably Orochimaru's cronies didn't see it that way, though. Now that Orochimaru was dead, they probably hoped to carry out his intent with Uchiha's body and make him immortal even though the source was gone. Shikamaru almost screamed in shock. Ino was once again only about 6 inches away from his nose. You do know something, she thundered without raising her voice pitch. He just about flew back to get some distance between them. What the hell? Spit it out, Ino demanded. Did Sasuke-kun tell you? How do you know? Know what, damn it? Shikamaru yelled back. I don't even know what the hell. That Sasuke-kun really is in love with Naruto. It was as if someone had beeped all sound out of the room with a vacuum cleaner. Both Shikamaru and Ino stood extremely still, as if they were trying to be images in a still-shot photograph. Shoji poked his head into the shop to say good morning as usual, noted the atmosphere, and decided to come back later. Shika? Ino finally ventured. Anyo, I guess you didn't know, but, don't. Let's just keep this between us, huh? Shikamaru was silent. Ino's panic level rose. Shika? I'm sorry. Ino blinked. Shikamaru's eyes were focused on her own, but they were cold and hard, not the soft deep gray that she had come to know so well.
Sorry for what? She tried to smile. He didn't smile back. Ino let her brow furrow in a puzzled frown. Shika, you're being weird.
I'm sorry that he likes someone else. Shikamaru nearly spat the words from his mouth in a flat vehemence that felt very odd to him. So much emotion in his voice. He wasn't used to it. Why be sorry? Ino beeped her head to one side. It's not your place to feel that way. She was even more confused when he gave a bitter sort of chuckle. Yeah, you're right. It's not your place. Totally bewildered, and a bit nervous, Ino looked at the floor. But I guess you didn't know, huh? I mean, the way you reacted.
Actually, I kinda noticed. You just confirmed it, though. Shikamaru raised a hand to run it over his hair. They've always had a weird relationship, those two. Che, it's too troublesome to think about.
But it made sense, perfect sense. The small things he'd seen between the two of them were enough to alert even the dead, or at least he thought so. The hatred, the friendship, and then that terrible rivalry that had nearly ripped the two apart had only served to draw them closer to each other. Like a trial by fire, they were welded so tightly now that it only made sense that they would care deeply for each other, deeply enough to love.
And still this stupid, childish kunoichi that stood before him, this fiery, spirited girl still loved that goddamn Uchiha prodigy, even when she knew he'd fallen for someone else. This beautiful, strong woman. It really hurt sometimes when Shikamaru thought about how long it had taken him to admit that he loved Ino, that every time he had come to that conclusion he had pushed it aside because he was smarter than that. He knew better. How could he compare to her ideal? And yet the feeling had not died, it had only grown larger and more painful.
Men were truly masochists deep down. It was the only explanation that worked, that he enjoyed hurting himself again and again, because when he added up all the factors put into the soul-eating ache, it wasn't worth it. And yet, it was impossible to stop. Are you upset about it? He asked directly.
Ino lifted her gaze to meet his, and saw something in his eyes that twisted her stomach in a strange way, not at all like the feeling that she used to get when her old heart-throb would happen to glance at her. It was a stillness that gripped her now as she faced that gentle, melting comfort that was clear in Shikamaru's eyes, but would never leave his mouth in the form of words. He was such a frustrating person. Ino's jaw clenched in automatic response to her indignation. So frustrating, so hopelessly emotionless, so goddamn lazy. And yet she longed to believe in what she could see in his eyes. She yearned to rip off that scowl that hid his soul and behold the joy, anguish, anger and hope that lay underneath. She didn't know why, but she wanted to know him, so badly that it burned her guts. She wanted to confirm how wrong she was about him. She wanted to shake the image of her mind's eye and let her soul see him, see who he really was.
She wanted to understand what he was trying to tell her with his soul-deep gaze, the one that she was trapped in at that very moment.
Could it possibly be true? And as Ino opened her mouth to ask the forbidden question, the one that Shikamaru always managed to avoid, cut short or sleep through, Choji stuck his head back into the shop and shouted, "Ohayu." Then, as if on fire, he bolted. He could have waited, indeed, he had more tact when it came to the two of them, but he really had to get going to the academy to get his next mission. The mood completely interrupted, Shikamaru blew a sigh of relief and waved a hand languidly at Ino before slouching out the door. Ino did not wave back, but instead stared at the floor and clenched her fists. She did not know what to make of him. To be continued, and thank you for watching.